The nature of my body position was that my right arm, basically forearm and hand, was on the ground. And I was kneeling because the lines from my canopy were caught up in the vines and the wires behind me. So I was kneeling and held up, kind of in this proud-chested position. And my immediate reaction was I looked down, and no kidding, I reached down with my left hand and grabbed my arm and tried to put it back together, which may not surprise you to know that it didn't work.
Hi, I'm David Apen, founder of The Bucket, and your host today for The Bucket Podcast, a series of conversations in which we talk about the thing nobody wants to talk about, that we're all going to die. We can't prevent that, but what we can do is use that awareness as a catalyst to quit that job, take that trip, start that business, or buy that friggin' boat. Life is precious, and no one knows that more than today's guest, Andy Wirth. Andy recently retired as the CEO and president of Squaw Valley Alpine Meadows Ski Resort, and is also a former backcountry ranger in Rocky Mountain National Park and a member of an initial attack hotshot fire crew. Hey Andy, thanks for being here.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks a lot for having me.
And I'll bet the words, thanks for being here, have greater meaning to you than they have to most people.
You know, it's interesting. Every now and then, like many, like you and others and the listeners, you end up giving presentations, and whether it be genuine or frankly not, you oftentimes lead with, "It's really great to be here," and sometimes I'll say that and pause and go, "No, really, it's very good to be here."
Right. So I know you've told this story a lot about your experience, but for the people listening, would you mind taking us through what happened to you?
Sure. Before I do, kind of the prologue is pretty important, and I'm really genuinely appreciative of having this opportunity on this program and this podcast. I think it's really, I share it with you and the listeners and hope that some folks might be able to derive some, for lack of a better word, inspiration or something good from it. Certainly have very little interest in kind of self-aggrandizing or anything like that, but it is something if it provides some help or support or inspiration for folks, then totally worth it for certain. So that's
definitely
a pretty important, purposeful prologue, if you will. So the gist of the story is that I became a skydiver quite a while ago. Had done a lot of different interesting things in my very fortunate and blessed life and careers, from skiing, climbing, fighting fire. So I've had a really good series of good fortunate things I've been able to take on and enjoy. And skydiving was very much at the top of that list. So frankly, never done drugs my entire life, but certainly became addicted to this. Found that I had that interest. So I started jumping as much as I could on weekends with friends. And we lined up this one weekend in October of 2013. And we jumped on Saturday, was great. And then on Sunday, the winds kicked up and they shut down the drop zone. We had reason to believe that Lodi, which is only about an hour away, was still open. As it turns out, on our very first jump, a couple of things went wrong in this kind of cloaked sequence. So many pilots will tell you, for instance, that it wasn't this one thing that brought this plane down. It was these three things or these four things in a very precise sequence in a narrow period of time. And that's exactly what happened here. And that's why I had a bad landing, is in essence the way to put it. So the pilot did not fly what's called a jump line, ideally positioned to the drop zone. The winds also shifted from the time we took off to the time we jumped. We also jumped late. We jumped last out of the plane, which actually created a punitive nature to that bad jump line I mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. And then maybe overconfidence, pulled really low, my canopy really low. And the relevance of that is that when you pull low, you don't have a lot of time to remedy anything that's gone wrong. So I pull low and all of a sudden quickly look up and go, okay, got a good wing. I look down. Right now I'm at about 1,500 AGL, something like that, maybe in between 1,000 and 1,500. When I looked down at my altimeter and realized, well, I have a headwind coming into the drop zone that I have right in front of me. And I should have a tailwind, and pretty quickly assessed that, wow, this is not awesome, because I have some transmission lines in front of me, some transmission lines to my right, And I remember immediately thinking that there's always that headline of the next day newspaper that says the skydiver tried to make it over or under the transmission lines, in the past tense. And at this point, I'm probably down to 1,000 or 900 AGL. Ground's coming up pretty quickly at my feet. And so I hook turned and lined up in an area in between these two rows of vines, and was now, by the time lining it up, and now I'm at 200 AGL, and I'm going, okay, here we go. I'm going to land in between these vines. And I got really close to pulling it off. In fact, right as I was starting to flare, one of those gosh darn blustery winds pushed the upper left part of my canopy, and I'm really not more than, maybe 30 feet above the ground, slightly to the right. And right as it started to flare and then made contact, one of the high tension wires that they use to hold up the vines took off my arm. It shredded my arm basically from just below the shoulder, and it's called a degloving. It's very distasteful, but for many, but it tears away all the tissue down to mid, kind of down by my wrist, and it also tore off my arm at the elbow. It was perfectly dislocated, and that's the nature of what happened that day. And I'd say that I came really close to pulling off a really cool move.
So you're sitting there, lying there, looking at your arm on the ground. What was your first reaction?
Well, it's kind of not funny, but interesting funny, I think, in that the nature of my body position was that my right arm, basically forearm and hand, was on the ground. And I was kneeling because the lines from my canopy were caught up in the vines and the wires behind me. So I was kneeling and held up, kind of in this proud-chested position. And my immediate reaction was I looked down, and no kidding, I reached down with my left hand and grabbed my arm and tried to put it back together, which may not surprise you to know that it didn't work. At that point. So that was my immediate reaction.
And I'll bet your next reaction was to say, holy shit.
You know, it's interesting, and somewhat inexplicably, I never had any sense of panic or cussed or any expletives or anything like that. I certainly have that capability today and throughout my life, but in this one moment, I didn't, and I have no idea why, but I actually didn't say holy shit. I just kind of was looking around after I tried to put my arm back on, which didn't work, and then some other interesting things kind of came to my mind. And first and foremost, when I was a backcountry ranger in Rocky Mountain National Park, I had some pretty extensive medical training, and when we would rescue people, it's called high angle rescue. You may not be surprised to know that a lot of people are in a bad place when you're pulling them off of a cliff, basically. And you see all kinds of contortions and bad trauma. And then I went on later on, and when I started my career in Steamboat, Colorado, to serving on an ambulance and rescue crew, a volunteer crew. So trauma was not something with which I was unfamiliar. But this was the first time kind of this assessment was being levied on me by me. And so I did that quick assessment. And of course, that's maybe as close as I got to holy shit was, this is not very good. And what I quickly got down to, call it the EMT in me, was my brachial artery, which is kind of underneath your bicep muscle, is not that much smaller than your femoral artery. And so I recall thinking, okay, I'll do the math here. How many units do I have in my body on a given day? And what's the time here? And I was estimating I'm probably going to bleed out in 6 minutes. I remember thinking that. And in this case, there was nobody around, by the way. There's nobody. It was a D-Day landing. Everybody was scattered all over the place. Nobody made it to the drop zone because of the winds and the like. So I wasn't alone in that regard. But I was very much alone in the field in that moment. And that quick medical self-assessment was, this isn't going to go very long. And my next thought was tourniquet. I need a tourniquet. I looked down. If you know what altimeters look like, they make most of them make a perfect tourniquet. The challenge was I didn't have the ability to get it off my hand. I couldn't apply it necessarily. And it was kind of, I don't know how to say this other than my body position was such that I couldn't apply it to my right arm underneath this stub, which was my humerus. And I couldn't make that happen. So I took my fist, I balled up my fist. It's the only thing I could think to do, and very uncomfortably and with a fair amount of pain, stuffed it underneath my right armpit to slow the bleeding. And it was really quite uncomfortable to do that.
Sure.
Not only was it uncomfortable pain-wise, but it was also pretty unsightly. What's interesting is I'm not, that kind of stuff doesn't bother me, but it bothered me a little bit that day because I'm more used to doing it for other people.
Right.
So in this case, that was one element of what went through my mind, and self-assessment to treatment. And I was trying to calculate when it would, what would need to do to keep from bleeding out and keep from passing out. Because as soon as I passed out, I was a goner. And I remember, so this is what's wild is I have no idea how it came to me. It just came to me, literally just dropped into my mind out of nowhere. And it was just breathe. Almost everybody who works in trauma has a thing, has a statement. If I was to come up on you, Batman Rock on Lumpy Ridge in Rocky Mountain National Park, and find you in a bad way, and maybe your femur was snapped and you were in a tough spot, and I got to you and I'd say, hey, look, I'm Andy. I'm medically trained. I'm here to help you. And then you have this one line that you typically go to. And mine was, look, I just want you to look at me, and all I want you to do is focus on breathing. I just want you to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
I have you. And there's a reason for that medically, and that is you want to keep shock away, because shock is oftentimes what kills people. It's a response. It's the body's response. It's psychological as well as biological, physiological, and it's very real. And I would use that to give people something to focus upon, and also it had a role to oxygenate their blood and to help keep shock away. And so I found it. To me, it's just ironic that came to me, and that was my line, because not too many months before that time, I'd seen this movie about a very dear friend of mine who's a kind of a famous horseman nowadays by the name of Buck Brannaman. And Buck, they had done a video about him. And at the very, very end of the movie, they play this song by Pearl Jam called Just Breathe. It's a really beautiful song. I studied it, listened to it, and then things kind of calmed down a little bit in that moment. And I literally was saying, oh, just breathe, keep shock away. If I can keep shock away, I have a chance to make it. And so the lyrics of that song immediately came to me. And
what are those lyrics?
Well, it starts off with, yes, I understand every life must end.
Wow. Very appropriate at that time.
Well, it's kind of crazy, right? Because one might think that is a very, what do you want to say, depressing, morbid lyric that would lead you to a bad place. It turned out that those first lyrics, it goes on to say, yes, I understand every life must end. As we sit alone, I know someday we must go. And what's crazy is that those two lyrics alone came into my mind, and I started singing it. I'm like, wow. And I had this overwhelming emotion of being at peace with dying. And that's actually what helped me live throughout the next 10 or so minutes. And it brought me this sense of peace that I've frankly never felt in my entire life until that moment.
Wow, Andy. That's a powerful paradox, that singing about death is what helped you live. And I can't help but see the parallels with the Bucket's mission, where we hope that by embracing death, embracing mortality, people can live better lives. Does that make sense to you?
It would have not made sense to me until October 13th of 2013.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you it makes perfect sense to me now. It's interesting because until that accident, I would have never understood that thought of embracing dying, mortality, as being something that brings one peace. because at the list of fears, that's probably on most everybody's top 10, if not number one. In this case, in my case, I had never really feared death because I had never contemplated dying or death. Mm-hmm. But right now, I'd quickly accelerated in this moment from not only not fearing death, only because I'd never thought about it. Now I was embracing it and being embraced by passing. And again, my medical background and knowledge just allows me to be able to make that claim that it was omnipresent and it was moments away. And so the lyrics to that song literally brought me to peace with that. It brought me to peace with dying. And the paradox, the irony is, to your point, that's what allowed me to live and make it to the helicopter. And I said, I've given it everything I can to get to this moment. I'm out. I have nothing left. It's on you. I could hear the turbine spinning up. And I looked out the window, and the sun was so bright and so glaring in my eyes. It felt so good. And I kind of remember us taking off and flying. And I stopped singing the song.
You were in someone else's hands now. Wow. So one of the ways we talk about the bucket is that we want to give people the perspective of someone who has looked death in the face without actually having to go through the experience of that. Do you think that's possible? Or do you think the only way to get that appreciation is through a bad diagnosis or an accident like the one you had? Has your outlook on life and death changed because of the accident, or did you already have that mentality?
I didn't have that mentality, and the answer to your question is yes. So let me answer that in the order it was asked. Yes, it did change my outlook, maybe not surprisingly, quite profoundly. And no, I didn't have that outlook with nearly the sense of gratitude that I have now. It's a bit cliche to say it this way, but I'm on bonus time. It's just that simple. Mm-hmm. I shouldn't have made it out of that field into the helicopter. Right. And I have, the only way I can say it is I have this very deep gratitude for being here. And that's about the most succinct way I can put it. And I hope the combination of this story coupled with some of these thoughts for some of your listeners can maybe bring them peace.
In the bucket, we talk about everyone having a bucket age, which is your life expectancy minus your current age. So my life expectancy is about 85. I'm 60, so my bucket age is 25. And the idea is that we think that getting people to count their age down instead of up might make them make choices that they otherwise might not have made. When they really say, geez, this is how many years I had left. I hadn't really thought about that. Has your accident made you think that way in terms of your life and choices that you've made? For instance, did you retire from Squaw because of things that you wanted to do?
That's fascinating. I hadn't thought about it like that. And yes, there's absolutely no doubt. It was basically a convergence of moments and matters and situations. In many ways, I had accomplished more in my career than I ever thought I would. Actually, quite a bit. Done it sooner than I ever thought I would. But a lot of it was making decisions that I probably wouldn't have made because ego and pride and some things like that kept me going in the past. But now I have quite literally a different perspective, not just on what's important, but quite literally to me personally, what mattered, what really truly mattered. that fundamentally changed on October 13th, 2013. It's not so much things that I'm doing and activities that I'm seeing to that I always wanted to. It's more I'm doing things that I think quietly matter to me and are contributions to my friends, my community, and more.
What are some of those things?
Well, after I got out of the hospital, was pretty heavily medicated on Oxycontin, oxycodone, and gabapentin were kind of the big three. And, now I'm out of the hospital, I'm at home, and strung out, basically, heavily medicated and dealing with it. And every couple months there's a surgery and they're doing different things. But I started going into some not great places, mentally, emotionally. Not sure, but I might have been kind of hooked on those things, the oxys, I would call them. I was having I wouldn't say a tough time getting off them, but it was sure rational and justifiable to be on them. And this was in 2013, so my awareness on the power of those opiates was not refined. And so I ended up doing a TV interview back to work outside of Squaw Valley at the base, and this group of guys walks by, and there are about 20 of them. And I'm looking at them going, wow, that's weird. I wonder who those guys are. So I wrap up this TV interview, and I walk up to this group of guys as they're leaving at the end of the day, the mountain, the ski area. And I said, excuse me, guys, I'm just curious, who are you? And they stopped, and they all looked at me, and then they all looked at this one guy, and he came walking up to the front, and they said, well, who are you? And I thought that was like the perfect response. And turns out that was Troop 2 of SEAL Team 4. They were there at Squaw Valley seeing to winter combat training, taking a bunch of SEALs that were from Kansas and Texas and teaching them how to ski and introducing them to snow and the basics. And they all became very good friends and helped me crawl out of some pretty dark places. And those guys basically, without really knowing it and without great purpose, they basically put the spurs to me, kicked me in the ass and said, get off your ass, go run, go swim, go ride your bike like you used to. You used to be able to do everything and a million things, and now there's a few you can't do. What are you going to focus on? The few you can't do or the million other things you can do? That put me on a really positive trajectory, getting out of the hospital, and really helped me out quite a bit. I'll be eternally grateful because I made it to the helicopter, but actually one of the bigger challenges was being with myself months and months after the hospital. And I knew what to do in trauma, but I didn't know what to do then. And these guys were miraculously put right in front of me, very much by accident, and they turned out to really help me. So now I spend much of my retirement time trying to serve their community. And I have helped and work with the Navy SEAL Foundation. I'm on the board of SEAL Kids. I'm the chairman of the board of Special Ops Survivors, and it's just nothing more than a quiet way of me acknowledging and demonstrating true gratitude for what they did for me. So it sounds a little bit corny, but they welcomed me into their community semi-formally with a special wooden sword. And it goes back to the Spartans, and they named me an honorary SEAL because I demonstrated in action, not words, that the one key part of their ethos is I am never out of the fight. And of course, I didn't realize it at the time, but I guess that's what happened in October of 2013. I was never out of the fight. And that had a great deal of meaning to me then, and it has a great deal of meaning to me now. So I serve their community. I also work hard to recognize and support the nonprofits that are underneath and within the ski world. I'm on the board of the U.S. Ski Team and love working with that entity. I'm also on with another group called Share Winter, which is a group that helps a lot of kids that are underprivileged get into skiing because mountains help heal people. And so this helps kids that would not normally ever have the chance to get onto snow and learn how to ski. And I love that group. It's called Share Winter. And it's a great organization. I also am proud to be a member of High Fives, which is a nonprofit that was founded by another very dear friend of mine, Roy Tuscany, that helps big mountain athletes that have had life-altering injuries, broken back or neck. Powerful group. And we even created another group called Military to the Mountains, whereby we welcome 22 warriors that are kind of blown to hell, missing arms and legs and the like, to Squaw Valley, Alpine, Meadows. And I'll come back to why there's 22 of them. And have, as part of a tail end of an 8-week training that they do in Texas, we spend a week in Squaw Valley skiing, and the stories are absolutely heart-wrenching and heartwarming all at the same time about how these guys were very suicidal. They were in bad places. They were on OxyContin, drinking, and this program, I can remember one guy who was a Marine blown to hell in 2007 in Iraq. And he just said, "Mr. Wirth, this program is the only reason I'm alive." I looked at him and I said, "You kidding, right?" He went, "No, let me be really clear. I was very suicidal. I was on OxyContin, a bottle of Jack Daniels by my side at all times, and I always had a 45. And I can't tell you the number of times I considered swallowing that thing. This program is all that kept me going." 22 veterans a day on average take their lives. 22 veterans a day. Our country owes these people substantially more than we're giving them. And in this one small program, like many others, trying to serve people like this fella to make sure that we keep them way ahead of those demons.
Well, Andy, I thank you so much for talking with us. I appreciate you sharing your story, and I'm sure it's going to be inspirational to a lot of people.
I'm glad to share it with you. And like I started off, I think I called it a prologue, so I'll call it an epilogue now. I hope sharing this story is something that helps at least one person, because it'd be fair to say I've been in those places, and I hope this story helps inspire or just helps folks make it through.
Well, it's certainly inspired me, so I'm sure it will help inspire others.
Well, I just realized one thing, so I have a request of you to remain and figure out where this is recorded. If not, a little over a year after I got out of the hospital and started finding even more peace and outrunning a couple of the demons that were still chasing me, I found this writing by an Indian chief from the early 1800s, and it spoke to me on a lot of different levels, and it may or may not mean something to folks that are listening. And to me, it's something it's become a bit of a mantra or an ethos for me. It says, "Live your life that the fear of death can never enter your heart. Trouble no one about their religion. Respect others in their view, and demand that they respect yours. Love your life, perfect your life, and beautify all things in your life. Seek to make your life long and its purpose in the service of your people. Prepare a noble death song for the day when you go over the great divide. When it comes your time to die, be not like those whose hearts are filled with the fear of death, so that when their time comes, they weep and pray for a little more time to live their lives over again in a different way. Sing your death song like a warrior going home. Tecumseh, who's a Shawnee Nation chief." I think there's real power to that, real meaning to me. And in this case, I had a death song. I just didn't know it.
Thank you for listening. For more about how to get the most out of your life by embracing your own mortality, go to thebucket.com. That's thebucket, all one word, .com. And if you know someone you think should be on a future Bucket podcast, let us know at bucketfeedback@thebucket.com.